Oh, I know. Another Squid Game video. But hold on. I've got something to say that I think is a little bit different than the typical discourse about this show. But you gotta hang in there, and you gotta like, and you gotta subscribe to hear the rest. Alright, so Squid Game is now the most popular Netflix show ever, which is fantastic. South Korea has been crushing it lately, and I think it says a lot when a foreign drama is the most streamed show on Netflix to date. There have been a lot of original shows on Netflix recently that they appear to be promoting quite a lot, and the way that they've dubbed and subbed these series, while a little bit annoying and distracting, has allowed a greater spectrum of cultures to connect with content from diverse corners of the world. However, nuance, like subtitles and dubs, can sort of be lost in translation. Which brings me to why everyone is misreading Squid Game. In America, everyone sees Squid Game as a metaphor for achieving success in a capitalist system, and it's been panned by American audiences for having an unsatisfactory finale that undoes, or at the very least abates, everything that the show was ostensibly attempting to express about how being a good person might help you overcome the Squid Game. Or, to put it another way, it's too optimistic for a show about capitalism's grim reality. And to that I say, yeah, for sure, I can see that, right? Like, I see why a reading of the show this way makes the ending feel incongruent and off-putting to Americans. But I don't think the show is about that. That's an American interpretation of South Korean art. We try to view this show in familiar terms, but we speak different languages, literally and figuratively, and something about this show is lost when transposing it for an American audience. In fact, there are entire words in Korean that have no clear English translation since our worldviews are so different. For example, I found this one word that I think fits beautifully with this video's thesis, and I'm gonna butcher it, but bear with me. Jeong. Jeong is tough to translate into English because it encompasses multiple attributes that are distinct in our English lexicon, yet are all the same to someone who grew up in South Korea. It might represent a harmonious sensation of affection, sentiment, gratitude, and sympathy for people with whom you share social ties. And I want you to remember this word as we go through the rest of this video. I don't think Squid Game is about capitalism, or at least not about the brutality of capitalism and making it to the top. It's more nuanced than that. It's about the brutality of poverty and how the idea of Jeong can be the solution. Let me start by giving a little bit of geopolitical background here. The US has a distinct form of capitalism. We have a diverse market with a large number of consumer goods. And yes, we're capitalist, but in practice, we're also very, at least relatively, socialist. Most Americans can depend on 40-hour works week, we get paid time off, and most individuals get promoted every couple of years. Also, our parents worked for corporations and retired with 401ks and Social Security, and many older Americans own homes or rely on pensions, indicating that economic development in America has been generally consistent throughout time, and as a result, our economic model has endured and our social structures have had time to catch up. And that's generally speaking. There's still a lot of work to be done in America, but the point here is all to say that our social model has for the most part kept up with our economic model. But that's not really the case with South Korea, is it? South Korea's economic boom is relatively new. Only a few decades ago, South Korea was mostly agrarian. South Korean teens were picking up their dates with livestock and wagons, dragging them through gravel streets with cows and shit in the 1960s, when your grandpa was a teenager dialing up Susie Q on the rotary phone before driving up to make out Cliff in his dad's Cadillac. South Korea was as developed in 1960 as the United States was in 1860, and the economy is governed by a handful of monopolies. As a result, South Korea has innovated at such a rapid pace that it's caught up with the world's superpowers in terms of wealth, all in a single lifetime. For reference, this is what Seoul looked like in 1960, and here's what it looks like today. All of this in such a short amount of time. South Korea doesn't have several generations of pensioners dependent on Social Security. The concept is relatively new for South Korea, and the social model has yet to catch up with its economic one. Since South Korea's authorities haven't had time to determine the regulations that would ensure its long-term wealth, the country's political response to prosperity has been to address current challenges one by one. As a result, South Korea's population is expected to decline in the coming decades, with more elderly individuals living on pensions than there are young workers who can displace the rising cost of the resource-dependent older population. So to understand what Squid Game is trying to say about economic disparity, you have to consider it from the South Korean perspective. I mean, how can an American in a neoliberal culture appreciate a South Korean show's critique on a monopolistic society? We have different capitalisms. The show isn't so much about defeating or winning capitalism as it is about examining the trap of poverty and the everyday struggle to survive that characterizes South Korea, which I think is the nuance about the show that really does get lost in translation. And to prove this, I'll start with the end. Ji-hoon gets on the sorry, not that ending. That's the ending that everybody already talks to. No, we're talking about the ending that nobody seems to want to reference when analyzing this show. The head fake that is Oh Il-nam's character. An American reading of the character Oh Il-nam, or number one, is straightforward and obvious. He's this rich dude who's already made it in the world, and the people that he interacts with, the poor, the indebted, the victims of the Squid Game, they're all his playmates in a rich man's game to get one last laugh out of the working class before he dies. However, in South Korea, he might be perceived as a symbol of an aging population, contributing to the country's future problem of economic collapse under an aging demographic. Il-nam grew up in a post-war South Korea, escaping his disadvantaged upbringing by being at the forefront of progress in his youth. We know he was a key figure in the formation of South Korea as we see it today, which was sparked by the American aid following the war. Due to South Korea's focus on short-term solutions over long-term viability, the country is on a one-way route to economic collapse. He tells Gi-hoon that he started Squid Game since his wealth didn't bring him happiness, and many look at that to mean basically what it means, that an old rich person was killing people for shits and giggles because money didn't give him happiness. However, when viewed through the eyes of a Korean, it can be interpreted as a statement about the country itself, which has traded culture, welfare, and tradition for industrialization and economic prosperity, aided by the perverse capitalist system of the West, which peaked in South Korea during the 1980s. The 1980s was likely the decade in which Oh Il-nam was at the pinnacle of his power and influence, when our characters were growing up as joyful, carefree children, and when the first Squid Game began. Number one isn't arguing here that money isn't everything in the American sense, rather he's trying to say that we pursue financial prosperity at the expense of cultural wealth and happiness. It's a subtle difference, but I think it's an important one. They've sold away their sense of Jeong as a nation, and Oh Il-nam represents an aging threat to South Korea's future prosperity that will drive further economic imbalance between established wealth and the working poor in the years to come. And everyone in the game represents some form of poverty or the indebted class of South Korea, and at least one of them dies every day. And as some YouTubers have pointed out, the rules don't specifically prohibit multiple victors in this game, so you could get through several games with I think it was 40% of the players living if everyone looks out for their neighbor, because it isn't about winning capitalism. The individual who wins the game in the end isn't the traditional capitalist. The winner is the guy who prioritizes the well-being of others and doesn't even care about the money in the end because his motivation isn't greed, but rather the survival of his fellow man. American critics slammed this show for both denouncing and extolling the virtues of capitalism because Americans misread this show. They think it's about making it in a capitalist system, but really it's the daily fight to survive in poverty that's on display here. The players enter each game blind, not knowing what will come next, which is symbolic of the nation's leadership prioritizing short-term fixes instead of having the foresight to insulate its citizens from long-term problems, resulting in the metaphorical death of South Korean livelihood. Because this show gets translated from one dramatically different culture to another, Americans misread Squid Game, and that's partly because of American-centrism. We see it through the American capitalist perspective, yet it's a South Korean drama about South Korean issues. When you look at the challenges facing South Korea from a global perspective, you can see that the exchange of long-term security for short-term wealth is generating a crisis for the country's poorest citizens. And that crisis is a daily fight for survival, much like the Squid Games. By repeatedly solving problems with a short-term perspective, South Korea is condemning itself to a long-term destabilization, a zero-sum game. It may be possible to find solutions to the nation's problems by abandoning the now failing system built by the likes of influential oligarchs of the past like Oh Il-nam, and instead adopt a sympathetic attitude toward poverty centered around the Korean concept of Jeong. They simply need to be prepared to let go of what appears to be making them prosperous today in exchange for a better long-term path to cultural and economic stability in the future. What Squid Game is really trying to say is that poverty is a daily struggle, and when you focus on just what's the next thing that's going to kill me, what's the next thing I have to do to survive, you miss the writing on the wall that tells you everything you really need to see coming. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Media Matters. This was really more of an exercise to try to understand a foreign show from the context and perspective of the culture in which it was created. And like I said, there's a lot of nuance and understanding that gets lost in translation. There's a lot of videos out there that actually do a really good job of saying, hey, this dub or this sub didn't do the original performance justice, and here's why. And I think that translates not just to the acting, but to the themes of the show as well. And so I really hope that this, if nothing else, at the very least, helped you understand or helped you see foreign TV shows and foreign art in a new way. And I totally understand the irony of a white American dude talking about the political issues faced by South Koreans, a culture that I'm not a part of, a culture that I have no relationship with. But anyway, I hope you can look past that and, if anything, take away from this video that we need to at least try and understand different cultural perspectives. And I think that's what shows like Squid Game do for us, and movies like Parasite do for us. So yeah, anyways, hope you like this video. Go watch more foreign content. There's an amazing amount of content out there that you can just consume, if only you can get over that 1-inch barrier of subtitles. But yeah, anyways, hope you like this video. There's more like this. Like and subscribe. Thank you so much.